Okay, the book of Daniel, chapter 11. This is the chapter that causes people to think that Daniel was written much later. Because in this chapter, it's history to us, but it would have been prophecy to Daniel. Daniel talks about things that happens up to hundreds of years after his time, and he talks about it in such a detail that people believe that it was written later. But it couldn't have been written later, simply because the language used in the first part of Daniel is Imperial Aramaic. It would not have been known in Judea a few hundred years later, and some of the events would not have been known. So Daniel is an authentic book, right? The book of Daniel also when I was a young Christian, we were taught that there were 400 silent years where God didn't speak. And I had a problem with that because God doesn't stop speaking. Jesus says, my sheep know my voice. For you to know someone's voice, they have to be constantly speaking with each other. But God didn't stop speaking. Parts of it is right here in Daniel, and he never stopped speaking. Okay, so the book of Daniel, it has an odd structure. Daniel 10, 11, and 12 are all one big vision. And Daniel 11 is the longest, Daniel 12 is the shortest. So 3/4 of this chapter is history, or at least it's history to us. It would have been prophecy to Daniel. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to brush over that history. I may make mention thereabouts, but I want to get to the prophetic parts. So with that, all right, let's get into the book of Daniel, chapter 11. It's a bit late because I had lost my voice for 2 weeks with the flu, but better later than never. All right, so let's get into the book of Daniel, chapter 11. And so, as a brief recap, if you remember, in chapter 10, Daniel got a vision and he was praying about it. He was concerned, he prayed to God for what this means. And an angel was dispatched to him. And an angel, a divine being. And another divine being called the Prince of Persia, who was not loyal to Yahweh, decided to restrain or fight this divine being sent to Daniel. And that continued for 21 days until another divine being, Michael, was dispatched to assist. And when Michael came and assisted in that fight, all right, so we're seeing supernatural spiritual warfare here. When Michael came and assisted, that first divine being sent with the answer was able to come, speak to Daniel, and that answer that he brings is Daniel 10, 11, and 12. And then he told them, okay, I have to go back, rejoin that fight. And when we finished fighting the divine being known as the Prince of Persia or the Tsar of Persia, there's another one coming called the Prince of Greece, and we're going to have to fight him. So this is the continuation of it. So reading from verse 11. As for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. To me, it seems to be that this divine being is stating that he stood up to confirm and strengthen Darius the Mede. God appoints governments. He puts them up, he pulls them down. Some of them we may not like. But as Christians, we are supposed to respect authority and to respect the law. Now, that does not mean that we blindly or we go with laws that are anti-Christ. If someone passes a law say don't read the Bible or X, or you get jailed or you get killed, well, you get jailed or you get killed. However, the law says don't litter, you don't litter. The law says don't block the road, you don't block the road. On the flip side of that, that does not mean that you blindly support any foolishness and any wickedness from leaders, because God's going to put them up and God's going to pull them back down. Because at the end of the day, as I tell people, the people who came before me fought for the ability to vote. So I vote. But I don't support party X, party Y, or party Z. I vote for the least of the bad. They're all bad. So I vote for the least of the bad. Because who I support is the king to come. I support Christ. I tell people I'm a monarchist. But in the interim, the political group that is least bad, I'm going to vote for them. But I don't follow them blindly. I thought that was just something that I had to say based on the political climate. Okay, so down to verse 2. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings, 3 more. So in addition to the king that's here, Darius, Cyrus, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Let's see what they're talking about. So, Cyrus and Darius kind of ruled after the fall of Babylon. So after them there were 3 kings, the 4th one being very great. So after Cyrus there was Cambyses, then Badia for a very short period, then a king called Darius the Great, who was then followed by Xerxes the Great. Now, Darius the Great was an extremely great and powerful king. Some people read this passage and say they're talking about Darius, and some will say they're talking about Xerxes. They both were very wealthy. But Darius did some that the others didn't. Darius decided to provoke a particular nation that was weak, that became very strong. And it became very strong on its feet while marching. So in the time of Darius decided that the Greek city-states, some of the Greek city-states in Asia Minor were getting assistance from Athens. So Darius decided and these city-states in Asia Minor were being encouraged to revolt against the Persians. So Darius decided, I'm going to punish the Greeks by invading Greece. And Darius had an invasion at a little place called Marathon. And this massive army of Darius's faced an army led by 9,000 Athenians, along with a few hundred Plataeans and some other soldiers. And they were roundly defeated. They were wrongly defeated by the heavily armed Greeks. Right? And it's stated that after the defeat, one soldier whose name slipped me ran back to Athens shouting Nike, he ran into the city gates of Athens, shouted Nike, and dropped dead. Right? Which is why the distance from Marathon to Nike is 25 or 26 miles, which is why today a marathon is 25 or 26 miles. But back to this, what Darius did in invading Greece and getting defeated led to Xerxes the Great invading Greece, fighting at a place called the Hot Gates or Thermopylae against a group of 300 Spartans and a couple thousand other Greek soldiers, which, if you've seen the movie The 300, the 300 is a fictionalized count about that, where the king of Sparta, Leonidas, came to hold up this massive army that Xerxes brought, and eventually they got past the Spartans at Thermopylae, and they eventually I think they sacked Athens, and they were eventually held, and they returned to Greece. And what all that did was that stirred up anger and a vendetta in Greece that caused and that led to a young man deciding to invade Persia, a young man called Alexander. All right? Deciding to invade Persia about 100 or so years later. Let's continue. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. That mighty king is called Alexander the Great. So after all of that, all right, that created an enmity in Greece. And a king by the name of Philip of Macedon arose and started building an army to take vengeance against the Persians. Now, it was still David versus Goliath. Persia was mighty and massive compared to Greece. But he started building it. He started training people, and then he was murdered. And his son Alexander decided, okay, I'm going to continue it. And he took 40,000 Greek soldiers and invaded Persia, a place with a standing army of 400,000 at the very least. But let's continue. And from verse 4. As soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided towards the four wings of heaven, but not to his prosperity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. So Alexander invaded Persia. We've seen this before. We've covered this before. He defeated the Persians. He took over Persia. All right, he reached as far as India before he stopped. And then at the height of his power, at 31 years old, he just got sick and died. And while he had a half-brother or something like that, the boy wasn't mentally fit to rule. And while he had small children, they were small children. So it is stated, no one knows if it's true or not, because the first writing of Alexander was probably 300 years after he was dead. It stated when on his deathbed, when asked who shall inherit the kingdom, he said, the strongest. Let it go to the strongest. Whether it's true, we don't know. But at his height, his power was broken, as stated in the book of Daniel. And his kingdom didn't go to his posterity, it didn't go to his relatives, but it went to his friends and schoolmates. Let's continue. So, Alexander's kingdom was broken up, his territory was broken up, and it went to a group called the Diadochi, right? Or the companions, the successors. So, Macedonia and Greece eventually, it went to Cassander. Asia Minor, which is modern day Turkey, essentially went to Lysimachus. All right, there was a bit of conflict for a time between Lysimachus and Antigonus. I don't know if I'm slaughtering that name. All right, but eventually it went to Lysimachus. Persia, the massive area of Persia, went to Seleucus, and Egypt went to Ptolemy. So let's look at this map a bit. So this whole thing is the territory that Alexander conquered. So Macedonia, where he was from, went to Cassander. This area here, Asia Minor, it went to Lysimachus. And Persia, this massive area, went to Seleucus. And the next massive area, Egypt and environs, went to Ptolemy. Right in between, you're going to see a little sliver of land that's both yellow and purple. And that little sliver of land is called Israel. And the entire book of the entire chapter 11 is largely between the kings of the north and the kings of the south. North of where, south of where? Well, anywhere in the Bible you see north, south, east, west, it's in relation to Israel. So if you look at Israel here, the king of the north will be the Seleucid Empire. So the Seleucids. And the king of the south will be the Ptolemaic Empire. Now, when the Seleucids took control of this area, at first their capital would have been in Seleucus, somewhere around here. Right? No, not there. Somewhere in, look at over here. Right, Seleucia, which would have been around here. Look, Seleucia right here, close to Babylon. But they eventually moved it to Antioch, which is why so many of them were named Antiochus. They named the city after them. So they eventually moved it to Antioch. Antioch is directly north of Israel. And most of the Ptolemies they named this city here Tolmec. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. I'm going to bite my tongue. But that's directly to the south. So most of this book is between the 150 years of combat, because that's mostly the relations between the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire. They were at war for 150 years. So that's what most of this chapter is. All right, let's continue. All right, so it's between the kingdom of the north and the kings of the south. And in between the king of the north and the king of the south, in times of the little times of peace, there was a buffer land by the name of Israel. And in times of war, both of the armies would go back and forth through Israel, and at times Israel suffered greatly for it. All right, so let's continue. And from verse 5, then the king of the south, which will be in Egypt, which will be at Ptolemy, shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. After some years, they shall make an alliance. Who is they? The king of the south and the king of the north. They shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up at her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. So the king of the south was at the point in time where they're talking about here, after some years, or if you look at, I think it's the King James, they'll say at the end of years, which just means after many years. The king of the south, a guy by the name of Ptolemy II, his nickname was Philadelphus, gave his daughter, whose name was Bernice, to the king of the north. All right? The king of the north's name was Antiochus II, whose nickname was Theos. Now, Antiochus II was already married to a woman named Laodice. If you read Revelation and you see the city of Laodicea, it's named after her. So Antiochus II was married to Laodice, and by the terms of this peace treaty, he was supposed to divorce Laodice and marry Berenice. So he did divorce Laodice and marry Berenice. He had a child with Laodice, and he had a child with Berenice. And then Antiochus II died. And by the terms of this agreement, the child of Berenice, whose name I believe was also Antiochus, was supposed to be named the king. But Laodice didn't stand for that, so she came in and she essentially killed Berenice and the young child and made her son into the king. That's all this passage. That's what this passage is alluding to. All right, let's continue. And from verse 7, and from a branch of her roots one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their goods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. And for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his land. So what they're talking about. And from the branch of her roots, who is her? The her is Berenice. All right? What they're talking about, Berenice had a brother. When he became king, he was called Ptolemy II Euergetes. And he decided to come and assist his sister when things were looking bad. But by the time he got there with his army, she was already killed by Laodice. So he went to war with the Seleucid Empire, and he beat them back. He took thousands of miles of territory. All right? He basically carted off a lot of treasure and a lot of their idols and their gods. I think I read where he carted off something like 4,000 pounds or 4,000 pounds of gold and 40,000 pounds of silver. All right. Or 4,000 tons of gold. I can't remember how much, but it's 4,000 either pounds or tons, or I can't remember. And over 25,000 idols. And he took all of that and went to Egypt. But he refrained from attacking the king of the north, from the Seleucid king, for a while. All right. But then he went back into his land. All right. His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war far as his fortress. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north, and he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall rise against a multitude greater than the first, and after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. It's essentially warfare back and forth between these kings, the kings of the north and the kings of the south, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. And currently, to fight each other, they have to go through Israel. So it's combat in Israel. It's, problems with Israel. Some of them treated the Israelis well. Some of them did not. But it's constant battle back and forth. All right. As we're talking about the kings of the north and the south, let's take a look at this. So, the kings of the south, or the Ptolemaic Empire, it started with Ptolemy the first, called Soter. He is mentioned in verse 5. Ptolemy the second, Philadelphus, is in verse 6. Ptolemy the third, who we just spoke about, Euergetes, who was Bernice's brother, a branch of her root. All right. In other words, the same root that she came from. This is another branch. This is her brother. So Ptolemy the third, Euergetes, he's mentioned in 7 and 8. We just spoke about him. All right. Then there's Ptolemy the fourth, Philopator, or lover of my father. He's mentioned in verses 11 to 12. Ptolemy the fifth, Epiphanes, he's mentioned in verse 17. And Ptolemy the sixth, Philometor, he's mentioned in verse 25. And those would be the kings of the south, the kings of Egypt, or the kings of the Ptolemaic Empire. Let's look at the kings of the north. So the kings of the north, who reigned from mostly Antioch, which would be in modern day, not Syria, which would be on the border of Syria, technically in Turkey. All right, I think the old name for that place was Antioch in the times of the Bible. Now the name is kind of Antakya. Yes, Antakya. Yes, Antakya. All right, so those kings, the Seleucid Empire, would have been started by Seleucus the first, Nicator. And then there was Antiochus the first, Soter. Then Antiochus the second, Theos, which we saw in verse 6. Then there's Seleucus the second, Callinicus, which we'll see in verse 7 to 9. Seleucus the third, Serranus, which we briefly just went over in verse 10. Then there's Antiochus the Great, which we'll see in verse 10 to 19. There's a guy who briefly ruled, few years, but it was brief at least, and he's mentioned very, very briefly in verse 20. And then there's the guy who we are really, really interested in, Antiochus the fourth, Epiphanes, in verse 21. These are all the kings prophesied about in Daniel chapter 11. All right, so when we're looking at the kings of the north, the kings of the south, these are just me trying to attach names to those people mentioned. Okay, but let's quickly continue. And from verse 14, in those times shall arise a king of the south, and the violent among his own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. All right, so these guys, in addition to being at war with themselves, every now and then so the king of the north will invade the king of the south, or the king of the south will invade the king of the north and have to go back home because there's a rebellion at home and he has to go and put it down. All right, so verse 15. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city. So years after I stated that Berenice's brother had come and invaded and taken a whole bunch of Seleucid territory, well, then another king of the Seleucid Empire came and took them back. All right? And the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. So, it's, as I said, it's a constant back and forth until you get to some very, very, very powerful kings. Okay? So let's continue. All right? And the most powerful king is the king we're really interested in, which is Antiochus IV. But let's quickly get there. He shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. What are they talking about here? From verse 16 or thereabouts, there was a king of the Seleucids by the name of Antiochus III. He's called Antiochus the Great because really and truly, very few stood up to him on the battlefield. And while before the kings of the south were doing well, he stood up and he beat them back. And he would invade Egypt and he beat them badly. But he wanted to take over Egypt. All right? People aren't pleased with the land that they have. So the south wanted to take over the north wanted to take over the south. So what Antiochus the Great did was he had his daughter marry the son of, all right, the king of the south. They married the son of the Ptolemaic Empire, who at the time I think was a boy of 10 years old or something like that, or less than 10 years old. The name of his daughter, who he got to marry, but his intention, because his daughter answered to him and was obedient to him, he will get his daughter to marry the new heir to the king of the south, to the new heir of the Ptolemaic Empire. And through her, he will control the Ptolemaic Empire. All right? His daughter was a lady by the name of Cleopatra. Let's continue and then we'll get back to this. All right? He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. So he sent Cleopatra to marry this very young heir of the Ptolemaic Empire. And Cleopatra ended up falling in love with Egypt. And she did not work to undermine Egypt, but she worked to strengthen Egypt against her father. So it did not work, and it was not to his advantage that he got his daughter Cleopatra to marry the Ptolemaic heir. And from verse 18, afterwards he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. After his disappointment with his daughter turning against him as far as he was concerned, he decided to partner with a guy from Carthage, a Carthaginian general that you may have heard of. His name was Hannibal. And he decided to start attacking cities in Greece. All right? And he partnered with this Carthaginian to go against a little upstart empire that was now rising, that was the enemy of the Carthaginian. That little empire that he decided to partner with Hannibal against was a place by the name of Rome. All right? So let's continue. Verse 18, afterwards he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Then he shall turn his face back towards the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall not to be found. So he went and decided to invade places that at the point belonged to Rome. And Rome came, and it wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. His army was slaughtered. All right? And they made him sign a peace treaty where, one, he gave up all lands to the north and the west of the Taurus Mountains, and he had massive reparations to pay to Rome. Massive, probably many billions of dollars in today's money. Massive reparations to pay to Rome. So, of course, he wasn't pleased. So he had to march back. All right? So he decided to, kick the bear. And he decided, this was his first interaction with Rome, and he was soundly and terribly defeated. So he had to go back to his own land, and Antiochus the Great stumbled and fell. He died there. All right, he died on the way back. Let's continue. Then shall arise in his place, Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. In his place shall arise a contemptible person. Let's stop there. After Antiochus the Great, when he died, his son, a guy named Seleucus IV Philopator, was made king, right, on the behest of Rome. Because at this point, the Ptolemies, the Seleucids, had to do what Rome said. What made the matter worse is Rome was allied to the Seleucids' great enemy, which was the Ptolemies. So, one of the sons of Antiochus the Great, named Seleucus IV, called Philopator, love of my father, was made king. And what did Philopator do? He started taxing everywhere. Any wealthy temple he would raid and take all the money for, because they had a massive debt to pay Rome. They did not, after the battle with Rome, all right, that battle took place at, I believe it's in Thermopylae, and they were routed. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. The Romans desperately beat them at Thermopylae. All right, so they didn't want to fight Rome again. So Seleucus IV Philopator, he went about raiding temples, which angered some people, and eventually caused one of his treasurers or whatever to murder him. And in his place shall arise, from verse 21, in his place shall arise a contemptible person, to whom royal majesty had not been given. He shall come in without warning and attain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. So who they're talking about here is the guy who we've spoken about so much, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He was the brother of Seleucus IV Philopator, but he was not destined for the throne. In fact, he was taken into Rome as part of that agreement as a political captive, like a ransom, to make sure that the Seleucids keep their end of the bargain. And he took control of the Seleucid Empire, not through strength of arms or whatever, but by flatteries, by his mouth. He was a good orator, right? He was a good talker. So he, who it describes as a contemptible person, because he did contemptible things. In fact, he is the template of the Antichrist. There are very few templates of the Antichrist. He is one of them. He is the biggest one of them. In fact, Jesus used him as a template of the Antichrist, which we will see a little bit later. All right, but let's continue. All right, army shall be utterly swept before him, even the prince of the covenant. Yeah, he killed the high priest. All right, he did a bunch of things to Jerusalem. All right, but let's continue. We'll get to that in a bit. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and good. What did he do? He came and he just started robbing everyone. He started robbing the rich, which even his fathers didn't do. He was just, he needed money to make sure that they could pay Rome, but he did what no one before him did. He robbed the rich. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. Everyone could do whatever they want, but it's only for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. By this time, the Ptolemaic Empire is weak. And Antiochus Epiphanes, although he did not come in and take control as a great military leader, he shall eventually have a great military. And that is a template of the Antichrist. The Antichrist will take over, not through strength of arms, but by true flattery. And while he won't start as a great military leader, he will become or have control of a great military. All right? And even when the king of the south decided to go against him, he lost. He raised an army, and that army was defeated. Let's continue. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. And as for the two kings, their hearts will be bent on doing evil. By this time, the king of Egypt is a guy named Ptolemy the Fourth Philometor. He is actually related to Antiochus Epiphanes because he is his nephew. If you remember, Antiochus III gave his daughter Cleopatra to be the queen of Egypt. And this was one of the sons of the queen of Egypt. Now, Cleopatra would have been Antiochus Epiphanes' sister. So at this stage, he defeated the armies of his nephew, and he brought his nephew over, and they sat as if it's okay, we're allied, we're family. But both of them had wickedness in their heart, and they're talking to each other, they're making plans, etc. But they're doing it deceitfully, and how can we deceive and get advantage over each other? All right, they're lying to each other. All right, they shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the time appointed. You see, men can make plans, but God's plans shall prevail. Each one of them was plotting against the other of how we could get rid of the other. But God was going to get rid of both of them because his plans shall prevail. And in verse 28, and he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his land. All right? Let's continue. At the time appointed by who? You see, as I said, God, men make plans, but God always have a plan. And God's plan is based on time. You'll see constantly in the Bible at the time appointed. Nothing happens before its time. So at the time appointed, not by this dude, right? By God. But at the time appointed, he shall return and come into the south. But it shall not be this time as it was before. You see, the last time he came into the south, he came and he defeated the armies of his nephew. So this time he believes he is going to wipe them out. He's going to take control of Egypt because at this time he's strong, he's powerful. So at the time appointed he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. Verse 30, for the ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw and turn back and be enraged and take action against the Holy Covenant. What's this about? Kittim is the ancient name for Cyprus. It's a mighty empire. Now you'll say that Cyprus was never a mighty empire. It was never a mighty empire. It wasn't mighty then, it's not mighty now. But from a particular period, Cyprus was taken over and ruled by Rome. And Cyprus was where Rome staged its Mediterranean fleet. Alright, the mighty fleet of Rome was staged at Cyprus, the old name being Kittim. So, what happened is Antiochus Epiphanes decided, okay, this is my time, I'm going to take over Rome. So he marched his army into Rome. And the now very weak Ptolemaic Empire called the ally Rome. So the ships of Kittim came. And they landed a small company of troops. And a very old man came to Antiochus Epiphanes. That man's name was Gaius Popilius Laenas. And he said to Antiochus Epiphanes, you either remove your troops from Egypt and from the Ptolemaic Empire, or you will be at war with Rome. In response, Antiochus Epiphanes stated, okay, I will speak to my council and I will get back to you and give you an answer. At that point, Gaius Popilius Laenas did something that is still mentioned today, although many of us don't know that's what we're mentioning. He took, I don't know if it's a stake or a staff or whatever, and he drew a circle in the sand around Antiochus Epiphanes. So he drew a line in the sand, he drew a circle. And he said to Antiochus Epiphanes, you have until you leave that circle to give me an answer. Otherwise, you will be at war with Rome. So that's where the whole line in the sand quote comes from. So, Antiochus Epiphanes deciding, I want nothing to do with combat with Rome, because my father got slaughtered in that. My father's army got slaughtered fighting Rome. So I don't want to fight Rome. You know, that's not something I want to do. So he decided to leave. On his way home, he had to pass through Jerusalem. So he decided to go to Jerusalem and make a ruckus. So let's continue. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenants. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and the fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate, or the abomination of desolation. I stated that Jesus mentioned him, and Jesus did. Jesus used him as a temple for the Antichrist. He said, when you see the abomination of desolation mentioned in the book of Daniel, run. This is what Jesus was talking about. What Antiochus did, he came and he decided, I am going to torment these Jews. I can't beat Rome, but I could beat these little, this small nation. So he came, he made it illegal to read the Old Testament, the Tanakh. He then sacrificed a pig in the temple. And if you know that defiles the whole temple. And the final straw was when he erected a statue, an idol to Zeus in the Holy of Holies. At that point, Israel erupted, Judea erupted, and it kicked off the Maccabean War. And you can read all about the Maccabean War in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Now, 1st and 2nd Maccabees isn't in the Protestant Bible, it's in the Apocrypha. So it will be in the Catholic version of the Bible, and I think the 1612 version of the KJV, but it's not in the Protestant canon. So why am I mentioning 1st and 2nd Maccabees? Well, if Jesus kind of mentioned it, in fact, at the end of Maccabees, when they were able to take, and the Maccabees defeated the forces of Antiochus Epiphanes, they were able to take back the temple, and they took control of the land. They took control of Israel. And at the end of it, when they rededicated the temple, all right, that they have a holiday that commemorates them retaking and rededicating the temple to this day. That holiday is called Hanukkah. The only place that you see Hanukkah mentioned in the Old or New Testament, in the Bible, is in the New Testament when Jesus celebrates Hanukkah. Wendell, where do you see Hanukkah in the Bible? The word Hanukkah just means dedication. When Jesus went up to the temple for the feast of dedication, he went up to the temple for the feast of Hanukkah. So the only place, it's interesting, the only place you see a Passover Seder, you don't see a Passover Seder, right, which was to commemorate the plague or the firstborn, right, the Passover in Exodus. You don't see that celebrated anywhere in the Old Testament. The first place you see that is in the New Testament. And the first place and only place you see Hanukkah celebrated is in the New Testament. The Old and the New Testament are very Jewish sounding books, to be honest. All right? So I will quote or talk about Maccabees because if Jesus celebrated Hanukkah, that's good enough for me. All right? So this is the template for the Antichrist and the abomination that makes desolate. What will be the future abomination that makes desolate? I have no idea. It probably won't be erecting an idol in the Holy of Holies. In fact, building a third temple and trying to dedicate a third temple may be a bit an abomination because that basically ignores what Jesus did. But I'll touch upon that in a different video. Let's complete Daniel chapter 11. But this is the template. Antiochus Epiphanes is the template of the Antichrist. Let's continue. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. So in the midst of Antiochus doing all this stuff, there were some loyal Jews who stood with him. But those who know God shall be strong and do exploits. And from verse 33, and the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery, and some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. Now, if anyone you realize we have gone way beyond Antiochus Epiphanes. In Daniel, it states that the Antichrist will overpower the saints and put many to death. And some will say, but that's a contradiction, because didn't Jesus say that the gates of hell shall not prevail against his church? Well, yeah, but they're different churches. And when I say different churches, I don't mean Pentecostal or evangelical or Presbyterian. I mean times. I am a Christian who believes in the rapture, and I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. And I don't believe in a pre-tribulation rapture because someone taught me that. I believe in that because it's in the Bible. And I probably will do a video on it. It's in the Bible. It's clear as day. It has no ambiguity. It's right there. And there is a church before that, and there is a church after that. And the church after that pre-tribulation rapture which some refer to as the tribulation saints, a lot of them will die. But a lot of them will stumble so that they may be refined and purified and made white. Not that they will, if they're black, they will be turned white, or not that they're going to change race. They're going to be made completely righteous until the time of the end. For it still awaits. God does things with time. God does things based on time. Okay, so at this stage, we're not just talking about Antiochus, we're talking about the Antichrist. And he shall defeat and persecute a future church. When the Antichrist comes, if you're a member of the church now, you believe in God, etc., you are going to be fine. Should I? All right, the reason I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture is simple. Right? The reason I believe is really easy. Okay, excuse me. Right, so the wasn't planning to do this, but the reason I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture is simple. In 2 Thessalonians, it states that the man of sin or the man of perdition will not be revealed until he who restrains is removed. He who restrains, who is who? He who restrains. In the beginning of the Bible, it says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, etc., etc. And the Spirit of God hovered above the water, or restrained the chaos. And when you see something mentioned first in the Bible, it's important. So who is he who restrains? He who restrains is the Holy Spirit. So until the Holy Spirit is removed, that's when the Antichrist is going to be revealed. Now, obviously, by now he's very revealed because the church is fighting against him. He is murdering the saints, etc. So he is revealed. All right. However, I believe God does not lie. If I thought God used to lie, I wouldn't be a Christian. And I also believe Jesus is God. Jesus is Yahweh. And Jesus says, I'm going to give you the Holy Spirit, and he will never leave you nor forsake you. Now, if the Holy Spirit is removed and the Holy Spirit is within me, or within the believer, if the Holy Spirit is removed, the believer has to be removed. Let me repeat again. Jesus says, I give you the Holy Spirit, he will never leave you nor forsake you. God does not lie. The Antichrist is not revealed until the restrainer is removed. The restrainer is taken away from the earth. So if the restrainer is taken away from the earth and the restrainer is in you, then you have to be taken away from the earth. And that's why I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. I'll decide if I want to do a video about it. But let's continue. And from verse 36. And the king shall do as he wills. Who is the king? The king is the future Antichrist. Right? It may be mentioned, it started mentioning Antiochus Epiphanes, but I think we are way beyond that. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. So at this point, this guy is against every god. He's against Krishna, he's against Buddha, he's against Allah, he's against Baha'u'llah. And he says astonishing things against Yahweh, against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is complete. For what is decreed will be done. You see, people could only go as far as they could go, but at a point they shall come to an end. And verse 20 and verse 37, he shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers. Some people believe he's a Jew because of this. because of this verse 37. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers or to the one beloved by woman. If you read the King James Version, it will say, or shall not be interested in the, I think it reads, or shall not be interested in the desire of women, or shall not care about the desire of women. So some people believe this means he is a homosexual. How this is translated, all right, he shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers or to the one beloved by woman. The one beloved by woman is a term used to describe the the Messiah. Prior to Jesus being born, in the first and second temple period, the desire of all women were to give birth to the Messiah. If you ask a rabbi, and the rabbi is honest, he will state that, this passage here refers to the desire of all women was to give birth to the Messiah. So this is stating he shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers or to the Messiah. He will not care. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall state that he is the only God. He shall pay no attention to any god before he won't be concerned with Allah or Krishna. He shall directly go against anything that has to do with Yahweh. He shall murder, kill Christians, and probably others. And he will state that he is the only God, and he will magnify himself above any gods. Let's continue. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. I have no idea what's the God of fortresses. I've searched, I have not been able to find out what's the God of fortresses. What's the fourth God, or the God of fortresses? Is it a God of war? There are many gods of war, but I don't know what's the God of fortresses. A God whom his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. I'm assuming the God of fortresses will be a God that stands up in the end, because there is an end time demonic devilish trinity. So I'm assuming it's that God. If you read Revelation, there's the beast, the false prophet, and another. That's called, hold a second. Right. In Revelation, it speaks about the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet. So, unless the dragon, he's the beast, unless the God of fortresses that he worships is the dragon. Which makes sense to me. The dragon being Satan, who wanted to have a throne, a fort, and have it on the same level as God. I don't know. All right? So, that's the God that he honors. A God whom his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god or an unknown god. Those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many, and divide the land for a price. God in the Bible keeps saying, don't divide my land. And people keep trying to divide it, even including the rulers of Israel, for peace. They're not going to have peace. God says, don't divide my land. But they keep trying to divide it, thinking we're going to have peace. You're not going to have peace. But let's continue. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. Now, this is no longer talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay? This is talking purely about the Antichrist. So at the time of the end, the leader, the king of Egypt, shall attack him. But the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall come into countries, and shall overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land. The glorious land is Egypt. And tens of thousands doesn't mean 10 of thousands, it means a very large number. Right? Tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand. Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites. Now, while Daniel talks about 3 countries here, Edom and Moab and the main part of Ammon, currently that's 1 country. Edom, Moab, and Ammon today is 1 country called Jordan. So the Antichrist shall defeat many. He's going to, the king of Egypt, or Egypt, is going to attack him, and he's going to get beaten badly. But little Jordan will not fall to the Antichrist. Why is that? That has to be God. And why does that have to be God? Jesus said, in talking to those people in Jerusalem, when you see the place surrounded, run. So they have to have somewhere to run to. And when Jesus returns, it states that where Jesus goes, he goes to a place called Bosra to rescue the remnant. You see, there are many prophecies, and there's one prophecy that states that this Antichrist, he's going to have war with everybody, but he's going to have war with Israel, and he's going to defeat them. And there's going to be just a remnant, and they're going to flee to Bosra. And he goes to wipe them out, and Jesus comes. And it states that when he comes and he goes to Bosra, when he's leaving Bosra, he'll be covered with blood. Alright? He'll be covered with blood. And by the way, Bosra, the modern name is Petra. That's in Jordan. Alright? I would have mentioned it in an earlier video. Alright? That's in Jordan. In Isaiah 63, it says, who is this coming from Edom, from Bosra? Okay? Bosra is modern day Petra. It means the sheepfold or the sheep pen. It's a trap. They're going to flee Israel and run to Petra. Alright? And from verse 42, he shall stretch out his hands against shall stretch out his hands against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Mighty Egypt will not escape, but Jordan will. Let's continue. He shall become ruler over the treasuries of gold and of silver. He shall become very wealthy. So he shall become ruler over the treasuries of gold and of silver, and all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. Excuse me. So Libya is Libya, and Cush would be modern day parts of Sudan, either the whole of Ethiopia or just parts of it. Ethiopia, South Sudan, North Sudan, Eritrea, that particular area there, any part of it, that's Cush. Alright? And all the precious things of Egypt and the Libyans and the Cushites shall fall in his train. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury. He shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. Usually when they talk about the Great Sea, it's the Mediterranean, and the holy mountain is Jerusalem. So he shall pitch his tents between the Mediterranean and Jerusalem. Yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. Okay, so news from the east. So he is there beating down Egypt and Libya and the Cushites. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. So when he goes out, he pitches his tent, all right, just to the west of Jerusalem, because the Mediterranean Sea is to the west of Jerusalem, and he shall meet his end. What's the news from the east and the north that shall alarm him? Probably that the Messiah has landed. We shall see, because this is coming soon. But in the meantime, this has been Daniel chapter 11. Chapter 12 is fairly short, so it's coming fairly soon. I hope you enjoyed it. All right, and look out for chapter 12, and there's a little prophecy addendum that I'll put as a separate video after chapter 12. So I hope you enjoyed it. I kept it very short. I'm proud of myself. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you, and God bless.